Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us on Business Incorporated. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwago. Coming up on the show, ECA urges African countries to focus on green investments in energy for a green recovery from COVID-19. Zambia, Zimbabwe to implement joint industrialization strategy. Plus, Kenya's trade deficit rises as imports go up. We'll begin this week's show with intraday market numbers, and among markets we track here on the African continent, only Nigeria's main index was higher at intraday by 0.69%. On the flip side, the JSE index shared 1.24%, while the EGX 30 in Egypt declined 1.63%. Kenya closed positive on Friday. Well, it was a different picture in the Middle East, where major markets were in the positive territory, except Dubai's index, which shaved off 1.23%. Abu Dhabi's main index rose 0.18%. Elsewhere in the region, Saudi Arabia's index advanced 0.20%, while the Qatari index added 0.09%. And look at the European market. Stocks were slightly lower today, with investors watching Turkey closely following the president's surprise decision this weekend to replace the central bank's chief. Well, let's cross over now to Chelsea at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange to bring us up to speed with more developing news from there. Hello, Chelsea. Good afternoon. Good to see you. Well, German leaders are meeting today to discuss lockdown measures as Europe confronts its third wave of infections. Germany has been in some form of lockdown since November. Is it likely to be extended again?
Well, Jimmy, it looks almost certain that when leaders start to meet in about half an hour, they will decide on an extension of this lockdown. Chancellor Angela Merkel has proposed extending the current measures until April 18th, so another 4 weeks. This is, of course, as we do confront this third wave of infections here across Europe, but in Germany as well. The daily infection rates have actually about doubled over the past week, so we are seeing significant rise in cases, and leaders are increasingly worried that the hospital systems could be overwhelmed in just a matter of weeks. So they are discussing not just extending these measures, but actually rolling back some of the easing that they've done starting at the beginning of March. They're talking potentially about closing some stores again in areas that have been particularly hard hit, potentially introducing a nighttime curfew, or closing schools in areas as well where teachers and students can't get tested on a regular basis. So this is obviously a big blow for a lot of businesses and a lot of people here in Germany who have been under restrictions for several months now and are growing increasingly frustrated.
All right, lockdowns being reimposed in Europe contributed to a big sell-off in European airline stocks today. Tell us more.
It has been a day of reckoning for the airline sector here in Europe. Many airline stocks had actually been doing quite well since the start of the year. They'd really been soaring because there was a lot of hope that with vaccination drives, with vaccines being approved, that we would see travel really reopened for the summer. That's all being really thrown into question now as countries are confronting once again this wave of infections. So we've seen airline stocks really get hit today. Some of the big names here in Europe, like Lufthansa or EasyJet, Ryanair, are down around 5% on the market, and it's looking like this could potentially be another lost summer for these airlines that are already really on life support, either from government bailouts or from having to take on more debt. So another summer of travel numbers being quite depressed would be a major blow for these airlines and for some of the majorly travel-dependent economies here in Europe, like Spain and Greece.
And Germany's DAX index has a new member as of today. Siemens Energy has joined the ranks of Germany's top 30 companies just 6 months after going public. How significant is this?
Well, for Siemens Energy, this is a major vote of confidence from its investors. It's just 6 months old. It was spun off from the industrial giant Siemens last year, and the stock has been doing quite well since then. So this is a big reputational boost for Siemens Energy, that it is now going to be included in the prestigious DAX 30 index. It's still going to be quite a difficult road ahead for Siemens Energy. You know, they really are representative of the broader struggles going on in the energy sector sector. On the one hand, they have a lot of business in these conventional fossil fuel areas, so things like power plants powered by oil, gas, coal, and those businesses are either shrinking or going to be likely mostly phased out in the years ahead. At the same time, they really are trying to invest a lot of money into the renewable space, so things like wind turbines and hydrogen, but that's very expensive and those markets aren't fully developed yet, so they're facing this transition in their business, so they've been really trying to cut costs. They've cut thousands of jobs and billions of euros worth of costs, but it remains to be seen when this is really going to pay off for Siemens Energy.
All right, Chelsea. Well, the week has just started and it looks like a busy one for policymakers, central bankers, and of course on data as well. So we keep tracking those developments there, particularly as the coronavirus continues to ravage the economy. Thank you. And fears of a third wave of COVID-19 in Europe and the escalating row between the UK and EU over access to AstraZeneca's vaccine could also weigh on the markets this week. In London, anxiety that the COVID-19 pandemic could disrupt summer holiday plans hit travel stocks this morning. Well, let's get intraday update from Juliana. Hello, Juliana. Good afternoon. Where shares in British IGA fell 6%, with jet engine maker Rolls-Royce losing 3.1%, the biggest fallers on the FTSE 100 index of blue chip shares. Now we have EasyJet also weakened, holiday firm TUI shed 3.5%, and cruise operator Carnival down 3% in anxiety over third wave of COVID-19. Is that trend continuing this intraday?
It is absolutely continuing. Good afternoon, by the way, Chimazen. You've spoken about most of this with Chelsea in Frankfurt. And yes, you know, the square mile is getting pretty anxious. And that's because even though London is doing massively way better than Europe when it comes to rolling out the vaccine, it is just a stone's throw away. And as you said, lots of British holiday makers have got their hopes up and their fingers crossed that they'll be able to get some sun in the next couple of weeks. And considering just how sluggish this vaccine rollout has been in Europe, it doesn't appear to be the case. Not only are we having this sluggish rollout, you can couple that with all of the fears that were spread because of the AstraZeneca anxiety. We had already heard from the EMA, the WHO and AstraZeneca itself that the vaccine was safe. The European countries put a halt on it, and now they're rolling it out, but they're having to roll it out as well as put their countries back into a lockdown. And I think, you know, the bottom line is the longer it takes to get your countries vaccinated, the longer it takes for your economy to start ticking again, and it does affect all global market equities. So we'll have a look at the numbers. The FTSE All Share up slightly, just by 0.01%. The FTSE 100 is down by 0.06%, and the FTSE 250 is up by 0.17%. In the currencies market, the British pound is down on the US dollar by 0.09%, down on the euro by 0.13%, and down on the Japanese yen at intraday by 0.27%.
And in corporate news today, Deliveroo expects its flotation to value the company at up to £8.8 billion, putting it on course to be the biggest London stock market debut since Glencore nearly a decade ago. What are analysts saying?
Well, it's a massive story, isn't it? And I think we've been speaking about it for a couple of weeks now. It appears as if bosses at the online delivery giant are drip-feeding news to the media. And what we've learned today is that, yes, it is going to be the biggest IPO in a decade for the UK. They've said that their shares will be valued between £3.90 and £4.62. And they also said that they're going to be offering £50 million worth of shares to their biggest customers. So any of our viewers that have been chopping on Deliveroo over the past year have got a chance to get their hands on what is likely to be a very lucrative share listing. I think, of course, this is a big story for Deliveroo, but this is certainly a massive story for Britain, British government, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak. During his spring budget on the 3rd of March, he did announce that he would be reinvigorating the London Stock Exchange and allowing more rules. And this is all about SPACs. This is something that's been massive for tech firms in the US, and now London are incorporating it. So even even if you are publicly listed, CEO can still take control over their company. And that's been a huge issue. It seems as if London has been in the dark ages because this is really popular in the tech world and in America. And even though Britain is still kind of struggling to maintain its dominance in Europe, it is really looking at America and taking over the tech stuff there. So, yeah, this is a great story. The IPO still hasn't happened. I'm sure we're probably going to have a lot of crossovers talking about Deliveroo until they finally list. But it is a big, big story.
Absolutely. In the meantime, the UK competition watchdog CMA has launched an investigation into Penguin Random House's £1.45 billion takeover of rival book publisher Simon & Schuster. What are the issues with this deal?
Yeah, this is an interesting story. First kicked off in November last year. Well, Bertelsmann are the owner of Penguin Random House. They announced that they wanted to purchase Simon & Schuster from Viacom CBS for $2.2 billion. Now, this has really rattled the feathers of some writers' groups in America. They're not happy that this merger will take place because they think it could potentially infringe on your right to freedom of speech because you've got a lot of big names, including Hillary Clinton, Stephen King, so many others. I believe even Barack Obama under these publishing houses. And if it's just owned by one major player, then that's a huge problem. And it clearly is a problem because the Competition and Markets Authority, the CMA, the regulator, has said that they will be opening an investigation into this merger. They announced that earlier today, I believe. So they're asking for more information for anybody who is concerned. I believe they are going to release their outcome sometime in June. But yeah, it is a massive story. And Simon & Schuster, Penguin Random House are major names. For it to be owned by one player has raised some eyebrows.
All right, thanks, Juliana. Do enjoy the rest of the day. And stocks in Asia Pacific were mixed today as investors watched moves in the Turkish lira following a sudden upheaval at the country's central bank. In Japan, the Nikkei 225 slipped 2.07% to close at 29,174 points, while the Topix index dipped 1.09% to finish its trading day at 1,990 points. South Korea's Kospi closed 0.13% lower. Elsewhere, mainland Chinese markets rose on the day, with the Shanghai Composite up 1.14%, while the Shenzhen Component gained 1.139 to around 13,760 points. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index shed about 0.2% as of its final hour of trading. Meanwhile, shares in Australia were higher, with the S&P ASX 200 rising 0.66% to close at 6,752 points. And in the U.S., stock futures were mixed this morning as Wall Street looked to bounce back from a losing streak. Futures contracts tied to the Dow Jones Industrial Average declined 41 points. Meanwhile, those for the S&P 500 were little changed, while Nasdaq 100 futures traded in positive territory. The move in futures comes after the three major indices lost ground last week. The Dow and S&P 500 slipped on Friday to finish the week down 0.5%. and 0.8% each, breaking a two-week winning streak, while the Nasdaq Composite rose on Friday but still finished the week with 0.8% loss. The struggles for stocks came as bond yields jumped again last week, pressuring the tech and growth stocks that led the market back from its pandemic-sparked sell-off last year. And on global oil market, prices resumed their decline in early trade today, falling around 1% as worries about a drop in demand for fuel products in the wake of yet more European lockdowns dominated trading. Brent crude was down 0.9% at $63.93 a barrel, while U.S. oil was off by 1.1% at $60.74 a barrel. Both contracts fell by more than 6% last week. The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries and its allies have put in place unprecedented production cuts in a pact to balance global markets after demand plunged during the COVID-19 pandemic. When we come back, we'll get an outlook for Tanzania's economy as a new president has been sworn in. Next. On Friday last week, Tanzania's former Vice President Samia Suluhu was sworn in as president after the death of President John Magufuli. Samia, who has become Africa's only current female national leader, is set to be a contrast with her predecessor in terms of personality. What will this new transition in Tanzania mean for the economy? Matt Kiniger, an associate practice lead for Sub-Saharan Africa at Frontier View, joins us now. Hello, Matt. Good to see you. Good afternoon.
Hello, thanks for having me on the show today.
So President Magufuli was a divisive figure, but what do we know about Tanzania's new president, Samia Suluhu Hassan?
Yes, so Mr. Magufuli's leadership style was often quite divisive. He was criticized for being quite autocratic, and his stance on COVID-19 was controversial, to say the least. But in terms of the new president's style, well, she's relatively unknown, I would say, in terms of our understanding of her from an international perspective. As you mentioned, she's going to be Tanzania's first female president, which is quite an achievement for her and for the country. But what we do know is that she's played quite a prominent role when it comes to representing Tanzania at a regional level. So she's very well versed in diplomacy when it comes to the Southern African Development Community, the East African Community, as well as the African Union. So I think she stands quite favorably in terms of her experience in that regard. Another thing worth mentioning from a domestic perspective is that she's actually from Zanzibar, which means that it could be quite interesting to see what she does in terms of representing Zanzibar and policy with regard to Zanzibar over the coming years.
So, do you expect economic policy to change and for Tanzania to head in a different direction under Hassan's leadership?
So the crucial thing we're really looking for with regards to her policy stance is what her relationship with international organizations will be, both within Sub-Saharan Africa, but also in the world more broadly. Crucially, what her relationship with the World Health Organization is going to be. So Mr. Magufuli was rather, I wouldn't say a pariah, but he kept himself rather separate from international organizations. So her engagement with international organizations such as the World Health Organization will be really crucial. It's also worth remembering that elections are not until 2025, so she, in theory, could remain in power for the next 4 or 5 years. And so over this period of time, a lot can change, but we do expect she will spend a lot of time consolidating her power base. So in terms of what we expect for policy going forwards, so we probably expect some shift when it comes to COVID-19 containment, international engagement, but it's very difficult to tell whether there's going to be a wholesale change to economic policy at the time being.
Now, Tanzania's economy has performed relatively well despite the pandemic. Do you expect this upbeat performance to continue in the coming years?
Yes, so official statistics showed that the economy grew by around about 4% in both Q2 and Q3 in 2020, which is really good performance by global standards. Very broadly, we do expect upbeat growth to continue in 2021, 2022, mainly being driven by healthy performance in the manufacturing sectors. Infrastructure construction and investment will continue over the coming year. And agriculture is also likely to perform relatively well because of favorable weather conditions that we've seen across East and Southern Africa. In terms of some of the risks, so obviously the country's COVID-19 situation is quite, we're not really sure what the situation is, but it is alleged to be quite bad, so that is a downside risk. Also, international tourism is also vulnerable to the continued global COVID-19 pandemic. But I would say, on a positive note, the country's monetary landscape is quite stable in terms of inflation and currency, so that's something that businesses can look forward to over the coming year.
All right, thank you very much, Matt. It's always a pleasure having you on the program. Be well and stay safe.
Thank you, you too.
And the Economic Commission for Africa is urging African countries to focus on green investments and energy for a green recovery in the aftermath of the coronavirus pandemic, adding that placing investments in sustainable energy among central recovery goals is critical. The Director of Private Sector Development and Finance Division at the ECA says accessible, reliable, affordable and sustainable electricity will underpin more inclusive, economic and sustainable industrialization across the continent. According to the ECA Director, the key elements for a better recovery and building forward better and faster were right policies, right finance and right investments. He says most African economies are heavily reliant on the production and export of primary commodities, making the participation of these economies in the global economy limited to production and exportation of limited range of primary products, reducing their prospects for export-oriented industrialization. Zambia and Zimbabwe have signed a memorandum of understanding to implement a joint industrialization project spearheaded by the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa Secretariat. The joint industrialization project will promote self-sustained, balanced and inclusive economic growth between the two countries. It will provide opportunities for the private sector to benefit from the African Continental Free Trade Area through enhanced competitiveness. The MOU was signed virtually by the Minister of Commerce, Trade and Industry for Zambia and his Zimbabwe counterpart. And data from the Central Bank of Kenya shows that the country's trade deficit widened by 4% in January compared to the corresponding month last year, as imports started to go up after months of decline. According to the report, the difference in value of goods and services imported and those exported in January stood at 106.4 billion shillings compared to 102.3 billion shillings recorded in the same period last year. Kenya mainly imports petroleum products, vehicles, household goods, pharmaceuticals and machinery, while the country exports tea, cut flours, vegetables and coffee. Total imports of goods in the 12 months to December 2020 declined 12.5% compared to the previous year, while exports grew 3.3% compared to 2019, largely helped by higher horticulture earnings. The data attributes the rise in imports billed in the first month of this year to higher cost of fuel and lubricants, animal and vegetable oils and manufactured goods. And finally, Egypt Air is looking to expand in Africa as air traffic recovers from the pandemic, even as the carrier seeks more than $300 million in additional government aid. The chief executive officer of Egypt Air says the airline plans to help develop a new Ghanaian carrier and is weighing a joint venture with a Sudanese airline. The company is also in talks with Sudan Airways, the troubled state carrier of Egypt's southern neighbor, for an initiative that might involve establishing a transport hub, Zakaria. Egypt is also studying the possibility of taking over a flight service to Israel provided by Air Sinai, the only airline that currently has direct flights between Cairo and Tel Aviv. And that's it on the program. Thank you for watching. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwago.